Which paradox just mind person? The coastline paradox. The more accurately you measure a coastline, the longer it gets. To infinity. Brace paradox. From Wiki, the observation that adding one or more roads to a road network can end up impeding overall traffic flow through it. The paradox was postulated in 1968 by German mathematician Dietrich Brace, who noticed that adding a road to a particular congested road traffic network would increase overall journey time. One of my favorites is Zeno's paradox. In order to leave my apartment, just for example, I have to walk halfway to my front door, then I have to walk half the remaining distance, then half that distance, ad infinitum. In theory, I should never be able to reach the door. Now I love this paradox, because we've actually solved it. It was a lively, well-discussed debate for millennia. At least a few early thinkers were convinced that motion was an illusion because of it. It was so persuasive an argument that people doubted their senses. Then Leibniz and/or Newton developed calculus, and we realized that infinite sums can have finite solutions. Paradox resolved. It makes me wonder what calculus we are missing to resolve some of these others. 1. Yes. It's Zeno, not Zeno. Blame autocorrect and my own fraught relationship with homophones. 2. Yes, there are 3 of them. 3. If you're getting hung up on the walking example, think of an arrow being shot at a fleeing target. First, the arrow has to get to where the target was. But at that point, the target has moved, so the arrow has to cover that new distance. But by then, the target has moved again, etc. So the arrow gets infinitesimally closer to the target, but doesn't ever reach it. 4. Okay, you think you could have solved it if you were living in ancient Greece. I profoundly regret that you weren't born back then to catapult our understanding 2 millennia into the future. 5. Yes, I agree Diogenes was a badass. I hope this covers everything. Reminds me of a joke. An engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician are at a bar and see a beautiful woman across the room. They're all too nervous to talk to her, so the physicist devises a plan to work up the necessary courage. Walk half the distance from them to her, then half the remaining distance. And again, and again, and again. The mathematician says it won't work because they will never actually get to her. The engineer says, well, it's close enough for practical purposes. The halting problem. You cannot create an algorithm that looks at a different algorithm and its input, then decide whether or not that algorithm will reach the end. This is too complicated to prove in a single Reddit comment. So watch this video if you are interested. Consider this scenario. Algorithm P is a copier. Give an input, and it will output that same thing as 2 separate outputs. Algorithm H is the algorithm that predicts whether a different algorithm will reach the end it will halt. It accepts 2 inputs, the algorithm and the input for the algorithm, and outputs yes if the algorithm halts and no if the algorithm doesn't halt. Algorithm F is algorithms that says hello if it's given the input no. It gets stuck in an infinite loop, doesn't halt if it's given the input yes. Now combine all 3 of these algorithms in order to make algorithm X. Feed algorithm X as the input to algorithm X. First thing that will happen is that algorithm P will spit out 2 copies of algorithm X and gives them to algorithm H. Algorithm H now has to decide whether algorithm X will halt if given algorithm X. If algorithm H says yes, X will halt, it will cause algorithm F to get stuck, and therefore X will not halt. If algorithm H says no, X won't halt, it will cause algorithm F to just say hello, and therefore X will not halt. Either way, algorithm H is wrong. It's impossible to design an algorithm that can correctly predict whether any arbitrary algorithm will halt given a given input. So I know this is just a silly thing, but at my old work, my department was food service. In our prep room, you had to always wear an apron. Always. No exceptions. When leaving the prep room, you had to take your apron off to prevent cross-contamination. The bosses were trying to figure out where to put the hooks. Inside in the back of the door, or outside on the wall. The UK triple lock that people moving to the UK experience. Need proof of address and photographic ID to open a bank account. Need a bank account and photographic ID to rent a place. Need a bank account and an address to get sent your photographic ID. Checkmate atheists. That this page is intentionally left blank page. The page isn't even blank anymore. Not necessarily a paradox as much as a mindfuck, but it's a theorem in math called Gödel's incompleteness theorem. Formal mathematics can be thought of as the study of systems of axioms, and what you can prove from those systems. Axioms are essentially your base assumptions, and theorems are just different successive ways of combining the axioms to prove some larger statement. Gödel proved that, so long as your collection axioms can model basic arithmetic, which is to say basically any collection that isn't stupidly simple, there will always be things that are both true and unprovable with your axioms. It doesn't matter how many you have, always. This was pretty unnerving to mathematicians of the time. The Banach-Tarski paradox is one hell of a mindfuck. It's basically taking something, and rearranging it to form another exact copy of itself while still having the complete original. Like taking a sphere, which has infinite points on it, and drawing line from every point on its surface to the center, or the core of the sphere. Then you separate the lines from the sphere, but because there is infinite points you now have an exact copy of the original sphere. It's kind of hard to explain here, so just watch the Vsauce video on it for a more in-depth explanation. What about the Song of Storms from The Legend of Zelda? In The Legend of Zelda Ocarina of Time, you travel through time between child and adult by using the Master Sword, and doing so you can come back to certain areas to get different items from both times. Well, one song that you learn is called the Song of Storms, and you learn it by going to the adult time and talk to a guy in a windmill. He tells you about a kid that came in 7 years ago and played a strange song and messed up the windmill and teaches it to you. After learning the song you can now go back to being a child and go to the guy in the windmill and play the song to him, despite not knowing it before as a child. So questions are, where did the song come from and who taught who the song? Did the windmill guy teach it to Link, or did Link teach it to the windmill guy? The ship of Theseus always kind of me. So, there's this Greek dude called Theseus, and he's on a very long boat trip home. His ship needs repair. They stop, replace a few rotten boards, and continue. Due to the particularly strenuous nature of this very long trip, several more of these stops for repairs are made, until, by the very end, not a single board from the original vessel remains. Is this still the same vessel? If not, when did it cease to be? Douglas Adams once shared an anecdote of this concept in practice. I remembered once, in Japan, having been to see the Gold Pavilion Temple in Kyoto and being mildly surprised at quite how well it had weathered the passage of time since it was first built in the 14th century. I was told it hadn't weathered well at all, and had in fact been burnt to the ground twice in this century, so it isn't the original building. I had asked my Japanese guide, but yes, of course it is, he insisted, rather surprised at my question. But it's burnt down, yes, twice, many times, and rebuilt. Of course, it is an important and historic building, with completely new materials, but of course, it was burnt down. So how can it be the same building? It is always the same building. I had to admit to myself that this was in fact a perfectly rational point of view. It merely started from an unexpected premise. The idea of the building, the intention of it, its design, are all immutable and are the essence of the building. The intention of the original builders is what survives. The wood of which the design is constructed decays and is replaced when necessary. To be overly concerned with the original materials, which are merely sentimental souvenirs of the past, is to fail to see the living building itself. For me, it's a very interesting example of how different cultures interpret the idea of continuity. For example, there is a shrine complex in Japan called Ai's Shrine, which is the most sacred locations in Shinto. Every 20 years, the two main buildings are dismantled and rebuilt, by hand, by hundreds of volunteers. This ritual is based on the idea of impermanence, death and renewal in Shinto, but it's also done to keep the skills of constructing the shrine alive throughout the generations. The same is done in many shrines and temples throughout the country. This is interesting to me because you could argue that the cycle of destruction and renewal with new materials is precisely what gives it its continuity. The unexpected hanging paradox. A prisoner is sentenced to death, and he is told that he will be hanged on a day next week, and on the day he won't be expecting it. The prisoner thinks to himself, well, if they hang me on Saturday, then I will expect it because there is no other possible day, so it won't be on Saturday. Then he realizes, well, it won't be Friday either, because I know that if I make it to Friday, they won't hang me on Saturday, so it has to be Friday, which means that they won't hang him on a Friday. He realizes this logic would continue for each day of the week, and so he concludes that there is no possible day for them to hang him unexpectedly, so he thinks they must not plan to hang him. On Wednesday they hang him, and he is completely surprised. The more you think about this paradox, the less sense it makes. The Boltzmann brain. The idea goes something like this. In any system, there is a tendency for entropy to increase, which is another way of saying that everything tends to spread out. In a room full of gas, the gas fills the room. It does not pack itself in a corner. However, because of the weirdness of quantum fluctuations, it is possible for particles to just spontaneously arrange themselves into more complex configurations. It might take trillions and trillions of years, but if you watch that room full of gas long enough, sooner or later you would see all of the gas pack itself into one corner before spreading out again. Or, you might see the gas arrange itself into a fully functioning human brain, complete with false memories, sensors, and a brief spark of consciousness. Of course, entropy would quickly take over again. The brain would dissolve back into gas almost immediately. This is also hideously unlikely, but over an infinite time the laws of physics tell us this is not just likely, it is inevitable. So which are you, human, or Boltzmann brain, enjoying the briefest moment of your fictional life before you dissolve back into space dust? Pinocchio says my nose will grow after I finish this sentence. Does it? Jim is my enemy. But it turns out that Jim is also his own worst enemy, and the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, Jim is actually my friend. But, because he is his own worst enemy, the enemy of my friend is my enemy. So, actually Jim is my enemy. But Newcomb's paradox. There are two boxes, A and B. A contains either $1,000 or $0 and B contains $100. Box A is opaque, so you can't see inside. Box B is clear, so you can see for sure that there is $100 in it. Your options is to choose both boxes, or to choose only box A. There is an entity called the predictor, which determines whether or not the $1,000 will be in box A. How he chooses this is by predicting whether or not you will choose both boxes, or just box A. If the predictor predicts that you will 2 box, he will leave box A empty. If he predicts that you will 1 box, he will put the $1,000 in box A. He is accurate an overwhelming amount of the time, but not 100%. At the time of your decision, the contents of box A, i.e., whether or not there is anything in it, are fixed, and nothing you do at that point will change whether or not there is anything in the box. It is a paradox of decision theory that rests on 2 principles of rational choice. According to the principle of strategic dominance, there are only 2 possibilities, and you don't know which one holds. Box A is empty, therefore you should choose both boxes, to get $100 as opposed to $0. Box A is full, therefore you should choose both boxes, to get $1,100 as opposed to just $1,000. Therefore, you should always choose both boxes, since under every possible scenario, this results in more money. But, according to the principle of expected value, choosing one box is superior because you have a statistically higher chance of getting more money. Most of the people who have gone before you who have chosen one box have gotten $1,000, and most that have chosen both boxes have gotten only $100. Therefore, if you analyze the problem statistically, or in terms of which decision has the higher probability of resulting in a higher outcome, you should choose only one box. Imagine 1 billion people going before you, and you actually seeing so many of them have this outcome. Any outliers became insignificant. In terms of strategic dominance, 2 boxing is always superior to 1 boxing because no matter what is in box A, 2 boxing results in more money. 1 boxing, on the other hand, has a demonstrably higher probability of resulting in a larger amount of money. Both of these choices represent fundamental principles of rational choice. There are 2 rival theories. causal decision theory which supports strategic dominance and evidential decision theory which supports expected utility. It is pretty arcane but one of the most difficult paradoxes in contemporary philosophy. Robert Nozick summed it up well: to almost everyone, it is perfectly clear and obvious what should be done. The difficulty is that these people seem to divide almost evenly on the problem, with large numbers thinking that the opposing half is just being silly. There are also an offshoot of Newcomb's paradoxes called medical Newcomb's problems. I've been in a situation like this before. I'll describe it. I went on an antidepressant, and there's a history of manic depression in my family. My psychiatrist told me that for some people, antidepressants bring out their manic phase, and they find out they have manic depression. They already did have manic depression, so it doesn't cause it, it just reveals it. She told me to watch out for any impulsive decisions I'm making, as that can be a sign of a manic phase. I was in line at a convenience store and thought, should I buy a Black and Mild? I don't really smoke, but for some reason it seemed appealing. Then I realized, that seems like an impulsive decision. But, if it is an impulsive decision, and I go through with it, and do indeed have manic depression, then I should just do it anyways. After all, it's not making me have manic depression, it's simply revealing something to me that I already had. On the other hand, if I don't do it, then I have no evidence that I have manic depression, meaning that there truly is less evidence, and therefore I have no reason to believe that I have manic depression. Strategic dominance equals by the Black and Mild. These situations aren't quite as easy to see, but they're interesting anyways. I'm doing quite well now and all indication is that I do not have manic depression. Fry becoming his own grandpa.